I really wonder sometimes why the reception is so negative for doing something like going on Reddit and saying what it is that I had to say about the whole, thing and everything with, I went into like the Final Fantasy, uh, 5, subreddit, and I basically just said what I said, which was, earlier, which is just that, well, okay, I have a perception now at this point that's starting to form of ARPG gamers, that kind of went into my post. It was without me saying it or anything. That there are a tough crowd to please. Like I look at it, and I've been listening long enough that when I really absolutely fucking hate Final Fantasy 15, and part of it is I don't like either its combat system or I can see why some certain people would find it fun, but as for me, that's just I guess I can get, what the appeal is of those jump buttons and everything are and everything for people that were wanted the instant dopamine hit. But, for somebody like me, I'm one of the people that the style of Dungeons and Dragons where like you strategize and everything and that you plan things out and you don't make a move without thinking it through first and everything and you think about things. You don't just go and do them, for usually you plot your actions out, you try to do something intelligent with it and crowd control and everything and all those aspects of the tabletop Dungeons and Dragons experience was always very, very appealing. And the way that we as players, when you get a good group together and everything that knows what they're kind of sort of knows what they're doing and is experienced is playing, you will see what happens and that they take command of the battlefield pretty effectively and everything. They use the tactics that are going to be the most effective and yield the best results for the team on the battlefield and everything. And they don't mind giving feedback to each other to help each other be better at doing what they do. I mean, like I remember like last night I got told about that I should have webbed the archers and or well because not all of them were archers. Some of them had weapons. You know that were they were not ranged, but melee range, and I could have gotten them in the web so that they couldn't go and attack the other people that were over there. But we won anyways, so it was just a minor mistake and goof on my part, And uh, when I look at this and everything, I like turn based. I mean, I love that system. I love that I grew up with that. I mean, like I'm not like the gamers that are coming to Final Fantasy from like the first person shooter world because I never loved first person shooters. I mean, if I were to talk about my personal story and everything and the way that I feel about Final Fantasy and everything and the reasons why I feel the way that I do, like I'm autistic first of all. Second of all, if you know somebody that's on the spectrum, you how should I say this? One person that's on the spectrum. I don't want you to come at me with a that's nonsense. I have an autistic, friend, or I know somebody, or I know this person who happens to be autistic, and yet they play these action oriented games and they taught themselves how to do it and they're really good at it. And yeah, you might as well just be, might as well be what's coming out of your mouth on that because I would reply, yeah, it's a spectrum, and the symptoms don't always present the same from autistic to autistic. They don't always look the same. I mean, like, how many autistics you do know that always take what people say seriously, who never pick up on sarcasm, who aren't aware of sarcasm, who have trouble picking up on it if there aren't cues for the sarcasm that's taking place. How often do you encounter people that have that problem with the whole thing? And I use analogies when I try to describe something sometimes. Like, I'll talk about the experience of playing multi-user dungeons and invasions in Gemstone IV and Dragon Realms back when I was playing them and everything, and the way that those that makes the whole experience feel like the difference between a book and reading a book and playing and watching a movie basically only applied to the world of gaming. I grew up on the command line because I faced a fundamental limitation on the PC side of things when it wasn't, these turn-based Final Fantasies that I was playing on the consoles. By contrast, I didn't have a graphics card on my computer. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the console market is cheaper. They subsidize, your purchase of the hardware for those consoles because they expect to make their money back on the games, which means that, ultimately the buy-in cost and the barrier to entry to the console market is much lower than the barrier to entry to the PC gaming market, and so what ends up happening is that when you can't afford a graphics card, you do play, the turn-based RPGs and everything. But, I came online too. I was playing multi-user dungeons, and I experienced a lot of things in those text-based games that, I've never been able to experience in a graphical game at all. And it got me interested in TTRPGs, and it got me interested in Dungeons and Dragons and everything else. And, I guess I'm a little bit annoyed ultimately. I mean, I go out there and I look and I see that, Breath of the Wild got huge sales, huge, huge sales. I see Zelda got huge, huge sales. Skyrim got huge sales. All these titles, and like I see, The Witcher 3. I'm aware of all these, other games and everything, and I see that the sales numbers don't lie for them or anything. But you can't obscure from me either the reality that turn-based RPGs sell quite well as well. You just have to make a good one to get people to gobble it up. Baldur's Gate 3 basically touched a nerve in that space as a consequence, and I do think that they've made something which is an interesting innovation, which is just that it doesn't have to be in turn-based mode, so you can turn it on and off, which is great, because it's like, well, then, well, they can appeal to both demographics if that's the case. But for me, it would always be on. You know, I just, I don't get the reason for the negative reception at all for me saying it and saying like, bro, I know, I see how popular this genre happens to be, the ARPG genre. I don't want that. Like, yeah, it's popular, but why did I guess where I get annoyed, is like the frustration hones in on Final Fantasy specifically, you know, and not other series. Like, I'm not mad at the fact that Skyrim is super popular. I'm not mad at the fact that The Witcher 3 is super popular. I'm not mad at the success of Breath of the Wild or the Zelda games. What I'm upset about ultimately is that there are a lot of ARPGs. Those ARPGs are extremely popular, and then, despite that, Final Fantasy used to be turn based, and I grew up playing those games as opposed to playing first person shooters or anything else. And on top of all that, like when I look at this and the way that so much frustration, like I don't understand why it is that ARPG people need to have 10 million different variations on the same fucking theme, okay? You've got plenty of games to play. You've got plenty of ARPGs to play if you want to play one. Why does Final Fantasy specifically need to be an ARPG? Like, do and this whole excuse of, well, that's what people are, like these people grew up on first person shooters. Well, not me. I live in the West and in the US, and I didn't grow up on them. I stayed away from them. I preferred my turn based RPGs that I grew up on over those first person shooters. But when I look at when I look at it, and I see it, and I see all this shit, like, the general thing that's going through my head is like, why are ARPGs so greedy that they have to be in control of literally every fucking game that gets made? I mean, why do you have to smother us out of existence that prefer it turn based? I mean, like, Final Fantasy used to belong to me. It used to do what I wanted to do, and then these goddamn games like Breath of the Wild and Skyrim and all these other ARPGs came in and did super stupefyingly well on the market, and now SC thinks, well, that's what we have to make. to cater to the goddamn market that exists. And I'm like sitting there like, no, I mean, Persona 5 sold really well, you know, and Persona 5 was turn based. And I'm not saying it simplifies down to it being turn based, why it's successful. I'm just saying, they made a great game that happened to be turn based, and they made it, strong. They did things with it that made it popular. And, it just goes to show, like, and Baldur's Gate is a new is an interesting spin on turn-based RPGs. By the way, number three, it's an interesting system to say the least. Like from what I've seen about it, and everything, because it's like, hey, I mean, this is an interesting implementation of Dungeons and Dragons, and what I wanted out of the TTRPG world in the first place. See, because I noticed the way that when we went out to the world of high tech graphical games, a lot was cut from the whole experience. I started to see that the cities in those games were regularly attacked by invading armies that they had switched, that they'd used the switch command to, basically go into demonic possession of the leader of the enemy army that was attacking the city, as the game masters would be playing as, the invader to the city and everything, while the rest of the player base rallied against them and tried to kill the character that they had, taken possession over and everything. They put on services like that is basically what I'm trying to say, and it was a constant, thing that was going on in the world of like Dragon Realms and of Alanthea over there, like Gemstone IV. It was Gemstone 3 when I first got into it though. But when I look back on it all, and I look, with this eye on things, like one thing I do notice is that I see ARPG gamers complaining that at Final Fantasy 15 and Final Fantasy 16, they feature action combat, but they tried to hybridize it too much, so that it did both things and appealed to turn-based gamers, and but because of the fact that they tried to keep it in this awkward two states instead of just going the whole fucking way with the whole thing, that they didn't like the experience and everything. And I'm like sitting there like watching these guys complain about everything and about the whole Final Fantasy 15, about them not liking it and everything, and all I can think to myself is, you know this is the crowd of people that is never really happy. They're not easy to please. Ultimately, they're a tough crowd and tough audience to please, which is just kind of surprising that SE would kind of go down this path, because you know I guess what I'm trying to say is that, like, for those people, everything they play is relative to everything else they've ever played. There's nothing that's come along that's going to come along and is, basically brand new in a category that never considered at all, and it doesn't relate to other things, and it's just this fundamental anomaly. It's always going to be put in the context of other games that they compare it to, and so when somebody comes into the world of Final Fantasy, that from that world, they're coming into it from like playing Skyrim, they're coming to it from playing The Witcher, and they find the whole experience ultimately disappointing in the Final Fantasy world. Whereas the franchise had built up for many, many years a loyal, devoted following of turn-based, fans, and then all of a sudden, finally when we got to 14, it sold so well online. It did very well on the internet, and then it did so well, and then 15 decided to go all the way over to action combat because of that. Like, but if you had noticed, I slipped out on Final Fantasy 14. I was like, I don't like this combat system, I don't want to deal with this, and it's not for me. I'm happy that people like this because I like the storyline of this game, and the community is ultimately very, I guess you could say, friendly, in that they post the cutscenes to YouTube, and I just go and watch their Let's Play streams of them, and so I can stay current with the story while I'm not interested in actually playing the game. And like, I checked out of that and voted with my wallet against that kind of MMORPG, and then went and started playing Final Fantasy 11 instead, and went back and voted for that with my wallet at the time. And I did that for a while, but no, I mean, lately I haven't been playing as much as I've been talking to people about games and talking to the internet about it. And I can honestly express my malcontent though with what's been happening in the world of Final Fantasy, because I never really wanted this series to be an oriented RPG. I never really did. I mean, I own copies of Octopath Traveler 2. I own copies of, Bravely Default 2. I own Live Alive and all this stuff. I have all of them, and I think Team Asano is the best studio out there right now, and I'm quite fond of them as a development studio and their games and what they've been putting forward. And when I guess when I look at Final Fantasy, I just kind of have this visceral reaction towards the ARPG crowd, where it's like you guys have a million ARPGs by now because the genre is so breathtakingly popular and overwhelmingly popular that the market is being saturated and completely flooded with ARPGs. Like, why do you need Final Fantasy specifically? And why will you defend it until your deathbed that this series basically be, not be turn based? I mean, why do that? Why? I mean, you've got Breath of the Wild, you've got all the Zelda games, you've got, Skyrim, you've got The Witcher, you've got, tons and tons and tons of titles. If I type this into Google right now, I'm sure I could find a whole bunch of other recommendations within the ARPG space by different titles, but I see people discussing it. I saw just recently today, and part of what contributed to my perception of the TTRPG crowd, not the ARPG crowd, as being, you know, uh, since my perception of things was to see this through, the lens of what I'm seeing said by, uh, by that crowd of people and that crowd of individuals. Now I'm going to try to scroll down onto my own timeline and, pull up what it is that I saw that had gotten me, thinking about all this and the disaster that it would be for Square Enix to try to, sell to this particular crowd. I think I'm getting closer, 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 closer. God damn it, No, I can't believe I'm still not there. God, I post too much, man. All right, I'm starting to think maybe Blue Sky. Damn it. Oh, okay. So From Software thinks there's room for improvement in game design if players can't get by without a guide. And then somebody comments, Christopher Lee Brown, can they replace Elden Ring's outdated combat design from 2009 with their best combat system from Sekiro? That would be great. And then Christopher Lee Brown then Sid Moran responds, that would be unironically by be based. And then Sid Moore, and then Christopher Lee Brown says, I thought after Michael Zaki said he was done with Dark Souls, he would have Sekiro be the blueprint for his games and iterate upon it. I guess not. And then Sid Moran writes back, people didn't like how much skill it involved. They needed an easier formula. And people are laughing at that in response to all of it. And I read that thread and I was like, this is why SE shouldn't bother trying to sell to this demographic at all. Like, and I wish I could post the screenshot in this video and go over to screen view mode more easily, but it was just what I saw, in the discussions that were taking place in it, and I guess I can put that up on Imager, so that I can put it in the underbar of this video, which I'm proceeding to do, here. This right here, this is a crowd of people, these ARPG fanboys that are incredibly fickle, difficult ultimately to please, a tough crowd, period, to ultimately get to be happy with an ARPG. They're not easy to please. They're always going to find something to complain about ultimately with your system. Like when you see what they're saying in these communities and you if you act as an observer who just watches ARPG people talk about ARPGs, this is how they talk about them with each other, and you start to realize, God, these guys will never be ultimately happy with anything, with their game. They're always going to have something that they want to do to tweak it, to make it better, and everything, and to mess with it, and change something about it and advocate for it and everything. And it got it just never they never seem to ultimately be happy with the ARPG they got. They never really ultimately do. There's this constant yammering and pissing and moaning about all of it from this particular crowd of people. And here SE is trying to pander to them. It's trying to, and I'm just sitting there and I see what they're saying, and my brain is going to this space where it's like, if that's the take that you're going to have about Elden Ring, and you're going to say that its combat system, you want it replaced with that and all that stuff, all that I can ultimately think, based on that take, is Jesus fucking Christ, what is, how is SE ever going to actually capture this demographic? I think that, I have gotten into discussions with people too, where like I'll be like, well, I didn't like. They'll be like, I don't like Final Fantasy 15's combat system, and I'll be like, I don't either. Yeah, damn straight, it isn't turn based, and then they'll respond to me, no, you don't understand what I mean. It's just not the action oriented combat that I want. They tried to make it a hybrid system that you know blended the two styles together of turn based and action, and I hate that. I want just pure action. Ultimately, and I don't want all these damn things that try to make it easier for people like you who find this whole thing too hard. Like they want Dark Souls 3 because Dark Souls 3 is hard for them. They want that challenge and I don't. That's the difference. Like I like that with a game like Baldur's Gate 3, the diversity and branching paths of options that you can take and ways that you can respond to a situation, and the way that every problem that you encounter in these games can be solved in dozens and dozens of different ways. And that always kind of appealed to me about about the whole Dungeons and Dragons experience, and it appealed to me about the world of multi-user dungeons as well, the flexibility that you had to respond to situations in ways that were not necessarily easily foreseen or predictable. you know the flexibility and extreme freedom that you had under these systems ended up being appealing, but the combo of it with the ability for the system to be turn based is just like, I'm drooling at this point about this whole idea. And SE, I mean, I don't like what they're into. I don't like the action style of combat. I don't like action RPG combat. I'm not into it. I can say that it's not for me, but everybody reacts to me as if what I'm trying to say is that they shouldn't make ARPGs, despite the fact that ARPGs are stupidly popular. No, I'm just saying they shouldn't make Final Fantasies that are ARPGs. That's all that I'm really trying to say. And somebody came back to me and was like, ARPG lovers deserve games that are catered towards them. I'm like, I'm not. There's room for both of us in this market and everything. I'm just saying Final Fantasy shouldn't have to. I would love a turn-based Final Fantasy. I don't want that. I don't want the fucking shit that those guys are into. And it's true. I grew up playing the turn-based games. I mean, I played 6, I played 4. I kind of sort of did 5. I found 5 to be a little bit too bare bones on its plot, though, to really be into it. I just didn't like the bone, the not much of a story to it that I felt about Final Fantasy 5. But 6 just, it had a powerful emotional impact on me. I talk about it sometimes and I'm like, this is the game that taught me that, like, at the opera house, that, I had felt that opera music wasn't necessarily for me, and here they were showing me that I would end up in tears and in reaction to the opera house scene, I literally cried, you know? Like, and I just for me, these are the games I grew up on, and, like, everybody else in the United States and a whole bunch of people in the United States grew up on the other style of games. They grew up on first person shooters. They grew up on, you know, they grew up on they have all these contexts that they'll compare it to, you know what I mean? They're going to try to compare the game to the first person shooters, these action fun games that were intense, and the West has just been absolutely saturated in a variety of games that they could try and has been spoiled, and being able to have an almost endless variety of video games. And so when they come to the experience of these games and everything, and they come to like, to these systems, you constantly see them pissing and moaning about whatever it is that they don't like about it. But I can tell you that SE is wasting their time trying to sell to some of these people, you know, because those people they play everything, they play everything. And for somebody like me that doesn't play anything other than turn-based RPGs, you know, do you see like why that might create a disconnect ultimately with where the series has been going and has been heading? Like, I don't, I don't get it. I don't get why the fandom has to do this. I mean, they'll say that the sales numbers don't lie, and that we can look at them and everything, and that they have more than proven the popularity of the ARPG genre. But I'm like, that doesn't matter. you know it doesn't really matter how popular the ARPG genre is, because first of all, people that don't like turn-based games largely don't like them because of the fact that they feel that it hasn't been enough innovation on the genre. They don't feel like there's nothing that really makes it feel fresh for them within the turn-based system. I mean, Baldur's Gate 3 is succeeding wildly beyond anybody's expectations, and I'm not surprised, because I look back on it and I'm like, Octopath Traveler sold 1,000,000 units. Octopath Traveler 2 eventually, after 3 months, sold 1,000,000 units at least. They more than made their money back on that. Bravely Default, did well. You know, but then all of a sudden, like, I'm forbidden from having the turn-based one I want, in the main, flagship of Squaresoft. Like, despite the fact that it was turn-based before this point, it wasn't, and that they'll say that ultimately that the people are saying that there hasn't been a turn-based FF in 21 years. I'm like, you don't think that that the endless like creation of remake after remake after remake, and on top of that, on top of the remake after remake and after remake effect, that the whole experience of, God, how do I say this? Like, they like all that they've put all of their focus into those remakes, and all of their focus, and they went into 10 years of development hell for Final Fantasy 15. Like, do you not realize that if there hasn't been a turn-based one in a very long time, and everything, that the immense amount of time they spent trying to make like the perfect action RPG with 15, and that they got screwed up on that project that went into development hell and got stuck for over a decade in its space, might have something more to do with that. I mean, they wasted a bunch of time doing anything other than making new entries into the series. So, maybe that's why it's been so long since there's been a Final Fantasy that's turn based. Maybe it doesn't. And Yoshi P and the others are actually interested in doing something like that again, and I'm glad that they are, and that would be my vote and everything, and that's what I want out of 17. I want it to be a 2D pixel art, turn based game. I really do. That would be my vote when it came to Final Fantasy 17. But it really annoys me. Like, I look out there in the reaction to the gaming market, and it's like, yeah, I mean, I understand. I understand how, like, amazingly and immensely popular that how should I say this? Like, how amazingly popular ARPGs happen to be. It's just that, like, I personally kind of checked out on all of them and basically said, "Hey, this isn't for me. I'm not into this." And and then I watched and saw how the primary franchise that had been, my like one true love within the gaming space, kind of got slowly taken over by action RPGs. And so it's like what I mind ultimately isn't that there is a diversity of action RPGs, it's that there's so many of them you have to start to wonder why the fuck it is that the ARPG crowd needs Final Fantasy. You've got plenty of games to play. Why can't you leave Final Fantasy itself alone?